Great Ireland, America discovered by the Irish more than 8 centuries ago. Pay attention to this read, brothers and sisters. So, once again, I keep telling you that we're dealing with the age of revelation, and a lot more information is coming regarding who was the originators, who was the original people over here, and many of these so called various different land masses or continents that we pretty much domicile in today. But the most important information is regarding who were those folks here in America going back to the time before the age of discovery, before the time of the so-called Vikings, because it's coming to show today that they actually still have descendants here who are not only over there in the British Isles territory where we call Ireland, but also here in America. So let's go ahead and read what this newspaper article says. Great Ireland, America discovered by the Irish more than 8 centuries ago. And it's coming from The Pilot, volume 37, number 44, October 31st, 1874. And it reads, the Honorable A.M. Waddell of North Carolina delivered a lecture in Washington last March in regard to the settlement of this continent before the discovery of Columbus. He had delivered it in several of the southern cities during the previous summer and was invited by the leading members of the Senate and the House of Representatives to repeat it at the Capitol. Beginning with an allusion to Vico's system of historical returns and giving Goethe's conception of that subject, the circular theory of civilization, in a few sentences, the lecturer said that his investigation of the subject under discussion was prompted by a passage in Humboldt's Cosmos, which stated as a fact that the first voyage of the Icelanders to Greenland in 983 AD was followed by voyages to North Carolina. This, he said, excited his curiosity and caused him to read everything bearing on the subject, the result of his conclusions being that Humboldt's statement was not only true, but less than the whole truth, for in his opinion, the evidence which he was about to offer established the fact that voyages to and settlements on the coast of Chesapeake Bay were made by a Celtic race before the discovery of Greenland by Eric the Red. He then briefly recounted the several voyages of the Northmen to the northern part of America, beginning with Leif's voyage in the year 1000 to Vinland or New England, giving the evidences which their real occurrence is based, including the finding of the runic stone on one of the islands in Baffin's Bay, which attracted so much attention among the learned when Rafa's great work Antiquities Americanae was published in 1837, leaving then the discoveries on the northern coast. He began the discussion of his main subject, which was to prove that the country lying between Virginia and Florida was before AD 1000, settled by Christians, was designated Hidvratmanala, or the land of the white man, and was expressly called Island Itmitla, or Great Ireland. To fortify his position, he gave a rapid sketch of the wonderful literature of Iceland, distinguishing the principal sagas which treated of these maritime expeditions and vindicated their authenticity, particularly the Lanamabak and the Erbija saga, the later of which contains the romantic story of Bajora, the champion and Bradavik, who was discovered in this country of Great Ireland 30 years after his disappearance from Iceland by Godleif Godlingsson, who visited the country in 1029. Many other evidences of a like kind were produced. Then, in allusion to the old story of Prince Madoc's voyages to this continent, recited some remarkable facts going to show that the country was inhabited by a Celtic race at the very early period, and gave a very interesting account of the early civilization of the Irish race, about whom he said there seemed to be wonderful misapprehension even among enlightened people. Following this up with an account of the rise and fall of free government both in Iceland and Greenland, he came to discuss Columbus' voyages. So far from making any attempt to rob the latter of his glory, he gave him full credit for his discovery and mentioned one or two curious and interesting anecdotes connected with it. In reply to the very natural question of what became of these early settlers, He observed that his inability to answer it furnished no argument against the fact that the Irish did make voyages to this country. The same question, he said, might with equal propriety be asked in regard to whole races who have existed on each of the four continents. For instance, the mound builders on this continent, whose monuments by thousands are still visible in many of the states. Analogous cases of still later date are not wanting. As an illustration, White's colony of 119 persons, 17 of whom were women, were certainly left in North Carolina in 1587. That is a fact which nobody would deny, but they were never heard of afterward. And although it is reasonable to suppose they were killed by Indians, still nobody knows such to be the fact. We only know that they were there and disappeared, and that is what we know, and all we know about the early Irish voyagers. As yet, it is impossible to tell with any degree of certainty what became of them. It must remain a matter of speculation. But there is an equally difficult question involved in the discussion, which these doubters entirely overlook, and which is now respectfully submitted to them, viz. Where did the children with fair complexion, blue eyes, and auburn hair found about Roanoke Island in the year 1584 come from? The fact that they were there cannot be denied. It is as well established as any other fact of history. Of course, they were not full blooded Aborigines, but must have descended from a Caucasian on one side. But there is no other record of a visit by Europeans to that part of the coast before 1584, except that concerning the Scandinavians from the Orkney Islands and Iceland who did not attempt a settlement, and the Scandinavians themselves testified to a still earlier Irish immigration. He continued with many other evidences and quoted Baron Humboldt's protest against the rejecting spirit in regard to such things. He then discussed the remains of various sorts, not of Indian origin, which have been found in this country, particularly the iron implements. But before going into that, he called attention to the discovery of the Phoenician stone in Brazil last year, giving an account of an expedition to that country 560 years before the Christian era. Among the strange things discovered on the Carolina coast, he mentioned that of a large skeleton of a man which was found near Wilmington many years ago, around the waist of which was a copper girdle bearing an unknown inscription. It was just such an one, just and one as meets the description of a Scandinavian warrior. The evidences of mining in the early age which have been found in western North Carolina were also discussed. The lecturer closed with a recapitulation of all the points in the testimony, which, when grouped together, appeared very formidable. The foregoing is a very brief synopsis of the facts contained in this novel, interesting discourse, which was listed or listened to attentively by a large and highly cultivated audience.